24-year-old Tiffany Campagna stood before the full-length mirror in her bridal suite, completely unaware of what was about to happen. In 3 minutes, dangerous hands would touch her bare skin and shatter everything she thought she knew about her wedding day. In 3 hours, she'd be imprisoned in a world of shadows and violence she never knew existed. And the secret she'd been carrying for 18 months about her brother's death would either become her salvation or seal her fate forever. But right now, Tiffany Campagna was just a bride standing in the sun-flooded bridal suite of an upscale venue, wrestling with the stubborn zipper of her vintage, lace wedding dress and counting down the minutes until she became Mrs. Richard Calloway. Tiffany Campagna, 24, studied her reflection with critical eyes. Honey blonde hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her hazel eyes, more green than brown today, sparkled with a nervous energy she couldn't quite shake. The ivory lace wedding dress fit like it had been made for her body alone, the sweetheart neckline and delicate off-shoulder straps showcasing her fair skin and the gentle curve of her collarbone. In 45 minutes, she would walk down the aisle and become someone's wife. She twisted her arm behind her back, fingers grasping uselessly for the zipper that ran the length of her spine. Her pink lips pressed together in concentration as she stretched, her shoulder protesting the awkward angle. "Jess," she called out, a breathless laugh escaping. "I need help with this zipper. I can't reach it." Her maid of honor sat on the cream-colored settee near the window, absorbed in something on her phone. Jessica glanced up with an apologetic smile. "Give me just 1 second. My sister's having a meltdown about her dress." Tiffany turned back to the mirror, her heart doing a strange flutter in her chest. Excitement, she told herself. Just pre-wedding jitters. Richard was a good man. Stable. Safe. Exactly what she needed after the chaos of losing Marcus 18 months ago. "I feel like I'm going to be sick," she admitted, pressing her free hand against her stomach. "Is that normal? I mean, Richard and I have talked about everything. We're ready for this. He's been so understanding about waiting, about giving me time to heal after Marcus." Her voice caught. Not every man would be that patient. Jessica made a non-committal sound from across the room. "Jess, seriously," Tiffany said, her tone edging toward playful exasperation. "The zipper's not going to zip itself." A hand touched the small of her back. Not Jessica's small, delicate fingers. These hands were large, masculine, warm enough to burn through the thin lace of her dress. The zipper began to slide upward, slowly, deliberately, each click of the teeth accompanied by fingertips that grazed the bare skin of her spine with unmistakable intention. Goosebumps erupted across her flesh like wildfire. A shiver rolled down her back that had absolutely nothing to do with the temperature of the room. The touch was sensual in a way that made her breath catch, possessive, like whoever stood behind her wanted her to feel every single moment of contact, to know that these hands were claiming territory they had no right to touch. A nervous laugh bubbled up. "Jess, what are you doing?" "Trying to give me ideas for the honeymoon." She met her own eyes in the mirror, cheeks flushing. "Save the seduction techniques for..." The words died in her throat. Dark eyes stared back at her in the reflection. Not Jessica's familiar blue-gray. Dark eyes. A man's eyes. A stranger's eyes, watching her with the focused intensity of a predator who had been hunting her for far longer than she realized. He stood 6 feet 2 inches behind her, broad shoulders filling out a perfectly tailored black suit jacket worn over a white dress shirt that was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing thin skin and the hint of ink beneath. His hair was dark and slicked back, a few rebellious strands falling across his forehead. Light stubble shadowed his sharp, commanding jawline, giving him an edge of danger that his expensive clothes couldn't quite hide. A silver watch gleamed on his wrist as his fingers completed their journey up her spine with deliberate slowness. But it was his eyes that made her blood turn to ice water, dark as midnight, burning with possession, fixed on her like she was something he'd already decided belonged to him. Gabriel Silvabarro smiled at her in the mirror, a slow, dangerous curve of his lips that promised violence and sin in equal measure. "Hello, little dove," he whispered, his breath hot against the shell of her ear, his stubbled jaw grazing her bare shoulder. "Your groom's not coming." His other hand came to rest on her hip, holding her in place against the hard wall of his body. "I am." Tiffany's scream never made it past her throat. Gabriel's hand clamped over her mouth, his other arm banding around her waist like iron as he lifted her clean off her feet. Her eyes flew to the settee where Jessica sat motionless, phone still in hand, her face carefully blank in a way that made Tiffany's stomach drop with a sickening realization. Jessica wouldn't meet her eyes. She thrashed against Gabriel's hold, her nails raking across his forearm hard enough to draw blood. He didn't even flinch. Her designer heels kicked uselessly at air as he carried her toward the service exit she'd never noticed before, the door already standing open to reveal a stark concrete stairwell. "Stop fighting, little dove," he murmured against her ear, his voice infuriatingly calm. "You'll only hurt yourself." She bit down on his palm, hard. Gabriel hissed through his teeth, but his grip never loosened. If anything, he pulled her tighter against his chest, her back pressed to his body as they descended the stairs. Her wedding dress, her beautiful vintage lace dress that had cost 3 months of savings, caught on the metal railing. She heard the delicate fabric tear, felt the cool air hit her leg through the ruined train that dragged behind them like a sullied flag of surrender. Tears blurred her vision, not from fear, not yet, from rage, from the crushing weight of betrayal that made it hard to breathe around his hand. The exit door burst open to blinding sunlight and a waiting black SUV, engine running, tinted windows reflecting her own terrified face back at her. A man in a dark suit held the door open, his expression professionally neutral as Gabriel deposited her into the back seat with surprising gentleness that somehow made everything worse. Tiffany lunged for the opposite door, locked. She spun back, ready to claw Gabriel's eyes out, but he was already sliding in beside her, filling the entire space with his presence. The door slammed, the locks engaged with a terminal click. "Drive," Gabriel said quietly. The SUV pulled smoothly into traffic as Tiffany pressed herself against the far window, her chest heaving, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Her once pristine dress was smudged with dirt and grease from the stairwell, the train a ruined tangle of lace at her feet, stained with oil and betrayal. Gabriel settled back against the leather seat, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at the bite mark on his palm, his movements unhurried, unbothered. "Where's Richard?" Tiffany demanded, her voice hoarse. "What did you do to him?" Gabriel's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Your groom." He tucked the handkerchief away. He took the money and ran, little dove. $200,000 to disappear and never look back. He didn't even negotiate. The words hit like a physical blow. Tiffany's hands curled into fists in her lap, her nails biting into her palms. "You're lying." "I never lie about business." Gabriel leaned forward slightly, his gaze pinning her in place. "And you, Tiffany Campagna, are very much my business now." His eyes held no apology, no hesitation, no doubt. Only ownership, only certainty that she belonged to him now, whether she understood why or not. The private jet was obscene in its luxury. Cream leather seats, polished with accents. A bar that probably cost more than Tiffany's annual salary. She sat rigid in her seat, still in her ruined wedding dress, refusing to touch the champagne Gabriel had poured and left within reach like a peace offering she'd never accept. He sat across from her, legs crossed, perfectly relaxed as they climbed to cruising altitude. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with ink she couldn't quite make out. A saint and a serpent, maybe, or something darker. "You kidnapped me," Tiffany said, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound strong. "People notice. The wedding guests, my family. Your family received a text from your number 30 minutes ago." Gabriel swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Apologizing for the cold feet. Explaining you needed time to think. Very heartfelt, actually. Her phone. He had her phone. They'll know it wasn't me. Will they? His dark eyes lifted to hers, and the pity in them made her want to scream. When was the last time your mother really looked at you, Tiffany? When did anyone in your family ask what you wanted instead of what they needed? The accuracy of the blow stole her breath. Gabriel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Let me tell you a story about your brother. Marcus Campagna, beloved son, protective older brother. Good guy who made one very bad choice 18 months ago. His voice was conversational, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. He borrowed money from my organization, a substantial amount. Money he promised to repay with interest. Marcus never. He did. Gabriel cut her off quietly. And when the debt came due, he couldn't pay. So he ran. And then he died in that convenient car accident before anyone could collect. Tiffany's hands clenched in her lap, her nails cutting crescents into her palms. You're saying my brother owed you money. So you're taking me instead? That's insane. Blood debt, Gabriel corrected. There's a difference. Your brother's debt died with him. But the cost to my organization's reputation? That required compensation. So when your fiancé came to me 6 months ago, terrified, desperate, drowning in gambling debts of his own, we made an arrangement. The floor dropped out from under her. What arrangement? I paid his debts. All of them. In exchange, he would leave you at the altar. Gabriel's expression didn't change. You became collateral the moment Marcus died, owing me. Richard just made the collection easier. Tiffany moved without thinking. Her hand cracked across Gabriel's face with enough force to snap his head to the side, the sound echoing in the cabin like a gunshot. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gabriel's jaw clenched. He turned his head slowly back to face her, and something dark and dangerous flickered in his eyes. Before she could move, before she could breathe, his hand shot out and caught her wrist in an iron grip. He pulled her forward out of her seat until she stumbled against his knees, their faces inches apart. Do that again, little dove, he said softly, his thumb pressing against her racing pulse. And I'll teach you what these hands are really capable of. His breath was warm against her lips. His grip was bruising. And God help her, she wasn't entirely sure she was afraid. Gabriel's estate rose from the landscape like something out of a dark fairy tale. Stone and glass and iron gates that closed behind the SUV with the finality of a prison door. Tiffany pressed her face to the window, taking in manicured gardens, a fountain with water that caught the late afternoon light, and armed guards stationed at intervals along the perimeter with the casual posture of men who knew exactly how dangerous they were, beautiful, terrifying, inescapable. The main house was a modern fortress disguised as a luxury villa, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that somehow managed to feel more like surveillance than openness. Gabriel's hand found the small of her back as he guided her through the entrance, and she jerked away from his touch, earning an amused glance she wanted to slap off his face. The bride arrives. The voice was smooth, sardonic, with a faint trace of an accent Tiffany couldn't place. A man descended the curved staircase, tall and lean in dark slacks and a charcoal Henley. His dark hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome if not for the cruel intelligence in his eyes. Still in white, I see. How delightfully symbolic. Tiffany, meet Dante, Gabriel said. My second in command and resident pain in the ass. Dante's smile was sharp as broken glass. I prefer voice of reason, but we can argue semantics later. He circled Tiffany like a shark assessing prey. Let me guess. You're already planning your escape, wondering which window doesn't have sensors, whether you can outrun the guards, if anyone would believe you if you made it to the main road. Tiffany lifted her chin. Maybe I am. Don't. Dante's amusement vanished. Escape attempts only make Gabriel more interested, and trust me, you don't want his full attention. He's already invested more time in you than any woman in 5 years. Don't give him a reason to become obsessed. The words settled like ice in her stomach. Gabriel's hand touched her elbow. Dante, show her to her room. The room? Dante's eyebrows rose. You mean the one you've been preparing for 3 months? Gabriel's expression darkened in warning. Dante's smile returned unrepentant as he gestured for Tiffany to follow him up the stairs. The room was stunning. A king-size bed with silk sheets, a sitting area with a view of the gardens, an en-suite bathroom with a shower that could fit 4 people. Soft lighting, fresh flowers. Everything chosen with impeccable taste. Tiffany's hand went automatically to the door handle as Dante leaned against the frame. No lock, he confirmed. Not on the inside, anyway. Gabriel wants you comfortable, not secure. There's a difference. She crossed to the walk-in closet and froze. Clothes hung in neat rows, dresses, jeans, sweaters, all in her size. Her exact size. She pulled out a silk blouse. Checked the tag. Her favorite brand. How long has he been watching me? The question came out as a whisper. Dante pushed off the doorframe. Long enough to know you take your coffee black, that you visit your brother's grave every Sunday, that you hate your job, but stay because you need the insurance. He paused at the threshold. Long enough to know you were never going to be happy with Richard Calloway. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like cell locking. Tiffany stood alone in her gilded cage, surrounded by proof that Gabriel Silvabaros had been hunting her long before he'd ever touched her zipper. Tiffany spent her first 3 days making Gabriel regret every moment he'd decided she was worth the trouble. She refused to wear the clothes he'd selected, parading through the house in the same borrowed sweatpants and t-shirt until Dante physically blocked her path with a designer dress and a look that promised violence if she didn't comply. She ignored Gabriel's dinner invitations until he had her physically carried to the dining room by 2 stone-faced guards who set her in a chair like a petulant child. She broke an expensive vase, accidentally she claimed, and watched Gabriel's jaw tick as he ordered someone to clean it up without taking his eyes off her. And through it all, she watched something shift in his expression. Not anger exactly, something darker, hungrier. On the 4th night, she descended to dinner in a blood-red dress from the wardrobe, her hair loose and wild, her mouth set in a line that dared him to comment. Gabriel sat at the head of a table in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a glass of wine in hand, looking every inch the king of his criminal empire. "You're late," he said mildly. "You're a kidnapper," she shot back, dropping into the chair across from him. "I don't think punctuality is high on my list of priorities." Dante, seated to Gabriel's right, made a choking sound that might have been a laugh. Gabriel's eyes never left her face. "You think defiance makes you brave? I think it makes me human." Tiffany reached for the wine, poured herself a generous glass. Something you might not remember how to be. The air in the room changed. Dante excused himself with a speed that would have been funny under different circumstances. Gabriel set down his glass with deliberate care, each movement precise and controlled in a way that made Tiffany's pulse spike with something that definitely wasn't fear. "You should eat," he said quietly. "You've barely touched food since you arrived." "Lost my appetite. Happens when you're held prisoner by a psychopath." Gabriel stood. The scrape of his chair against marble echoed through the suddenly too large room. He moved around the table with predatory grace, each step measured, until he stood beside her chair. Tiffany's breath caught, but she refused to look up, refused to give him the satisfaction. His hand touched her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "I've killed men for less disrespect than you've shown me this week," he murmured, his thumb brushing across her bottom lip. "Do you know why you're still breathing?" "Because you need me alive," she whispered. "Because I like your fire." His smile was dangerous. "Because watching you fight me is the most interesting thing I've experienced in years." Tiffany shoved back from the table and stood, needing distance, needing air. She fled to the library down the hall, a cavernous room lined with books that smelled of leather and secrets. She pressed her hands against the shelf, trying to steady her racing heart, but she'd barely taken 2 breaths before she felt him behind her. Gabriel's presence filled the space like a living thing. "Running, little dove?" His voice was low, intimate, far too close. "Escaping," she corrected, turning to face him. "Wrong move." He stepped forward, caging her against the bookshelf with his body. One hand braced beside her head. His other hand found her waist, spanning it almost completely, burning through the silk of her dress. "There's nowhere to run," he said, his breath hot against her neck, his stubble grazing her jaw. "Not in this house. Not in this life. Not for me." She should push him away, should knee him, scratch him, scream. Instead, her body betrayed her completely, arching toward him like a flower turning toward dangerous sun. Heat pooled low in her stomach. Her hands found his chest, feeling the rapid thunder of his heartbeat beneath her palms. "I hate you," she breathed. Gabriel's smile against her throat was wicked. Liar. Tiffany found the service tunnel on her second week, hidden behind a false panel in the wine cellar that she'd only discovered because she'd been desperate enough to search every inch of the estate's lower level. The tunnel was clean, well lit, clearly maintained and used regularly. Not an escape route, then. Something else. She should have turned back, should have returned to her room and pretended she'd never seen it. But curiosity, and a stubborn need to understand the man who'd stolen her life, drove her forward through the concrete passage that stretched on for what felt like miles before opening into a nondescript building that smelled of antiseptic and something else. Hope, maybe. The clinic was small, but efficiently organized. Waiting room chairs filled with women holding children, men with work-worn hands, elderly couples speaking in Spanish and Portuguese and languages Tiffany couldn't identify. A young woman in scrubs moved between them with a tablet, taking information, offering reassurances. No one asked for insurance cards. No one turned anyone away. Tiffany. She spun to find Gabriel in the doorway, still in his suit from whatever business he'd conducted that day, his expression unreadable, not angry, not surprised, just watching her with those dark eyes that saw too much. "This is yours," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Come with me." He didn't wait for her agreement, just turned and walked deeper into the clinic. She followed because the alternative was standing there like an idiot while people stared. Gabriel led her to a small office where files covered every surface and a woman in a white coat looked up from a chart with tired but kind eyes. "Gabriel, we need more." She stopped when she saw Tiffany. "Oh, Dr. Reyes, this is Tiffany," Gabriel said. "Tiffany, Dr. Reyes runs this clinic and 4 others like it across the city." 5 now, Dr. Reyes corrected, smiling. "Thanks to your latest donation." She glanced between them, clearly sensing the tension. "I'll give you 2 a moment." When they were alone, Tiffany turned on Gabriel. "You run illegal medical clinics. You kidnap women. You collect blood debts." Her voice rose with each accusation. "What are you?" "Complicated." Gabriel leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "The clinics serve people who can't afford health care. Undocumented immigrants, the working poor, anyone who falls through the cracks of a system designed to fail them. My legitimate businesses fund them. My less legitimate ones protect them from being shut down." "You're a criminal." "Yes." No defensiveness. No justification. Just simple acknowledgement. "Then why?" She gestured toward the waiting room. "Why help these people if you're willing to ruin lives like mine?" Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, something raw flickering across his features. "My mother died because she was afraid to go to a hospital, undocumented, terrified of deportation. She let an infection spread until it was too late." His jaw tightened. "I was 16. I held her hand while she apologized for being a burden." The air left Tiffany's lungs. "So yes, I collect debts. I break laws. I took you because your brother's dishonor demanded payment." Gabriel's eyes met hers unflinching. "But I also make sure no one else loses their mother because she was too afraid to ask for help." "That doesn't make sense," Tiffany whispered. "You can't be both. Monsters can still build hospitals, little dove," Gabriel said softly. "It doesn't make us less monstrous. It makes us more human." Tiffany stood there, everything she thought she understood about him crumbling like sand castles against the tide. Because the truth was so much worse than simple evil. Gabriel Silvabarros was a man who could destroy her and save the world in the same breath. And she was starting to understand him, Rio de Janeiro sprawled beneath their hotel balcony like a jewel box spilled across velvet, the lights of the city competing with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Tiffany gripped the railing, the humid night air clinging to her skin, her emerald dress, chosen by Gabriel, of course, catching the breeze like a whispered secret. The dinner had been excruciating. 3 hours of playing the devoted companion to a man who terrified and fascinated her in equal measure, smiling at dangerous men while their wives assessed her with calculating eyes. Gabriel's hand had stayed possessively at the small of her back all night, his thumb tracing absent patterns through the silk that made her breath hitch every time. "You did well tonight," Gabriel said from the doorway, loosening his tie with one hand, a glass of whiskey in the other. He'd shed his jacket somewhere between the restaurant and their suite, his white shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled to reveal those forearms that had no business being as distracting as they were. "I smiled and nodded and pretended to adore you," Tiffany said, without turning around. "Not exactly a performance worthy of an Oscar." "You made them believe it." He crossed to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that his warmth radiated through the space between them. "That's all that matters in my world. Perception. Control. Is that what I am?" She finally looked at him. A performance? Something to control? Gabriel's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded flickering across his features. "You were supposed to be." He took a drink, his eyes on the city below. "You were supposed to be simple. Payment received, debt settled, everyone moves on. But you fight me at every turn. You find my secrets. You look at me like I'm a puzzle you're determined to solve." His laugh was bitter. "You're supposed to hate me, Tiffany. It would be easier for both of us if you did." The confession hung between them like smoke. "I should hate you," she admitted quietly. "You kidnapped me, ruined my wedding, trapped me in a life I never chose." She turned to face him fully, her back against the railing. "But then you show me the clinics. You tell me about your mother. You look at me like I'm the only real thing in your world of shadows and lies." Gabriel set his glass down on the railing with deliberate care, then turned to cage her against the balustrade, his hands braced on either side of her hips. The city lights painted his features in gold and shadow, making him look like some dark angel fallen to earth. "My mother used to sing to me," he said, his voice rough. "Old Brazilian lullabies. Even when she was dying, even when the pain was too much, she'd hum them." His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "I haven't been able to listen to music since the day she stopped breathing." Tiffany's hands found his chest, feeling his heartbeat thunder beneath her palms. "Gabriel, tell me something true," he whispered. "Something that costs you to give me." The night her brother died flashed behind her eyes. Marcus's face, the gun, the truth she'd buried so deep it had become part of her bones. She opened her mouth, the words right there on her tongue. "I never loved Richard," she said instead, "and it was true even if it wasn't the truth he needed. I was going to marry him because it was safe, because after Marcus died, I was so afraid of feeling anything real that I chose numbness instead." Gabriel pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his hands coming up to frame her face. "And now I'm terrified," she breathed, "because everything I feel with you is so real it burns." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the library. This was soft, searching, devastating in its tenderness. Rio burned below them while Tiffany fell apart in Gabriel's arms, her secret lodged like a knife between her ribs. Their return from Rio changed, and everyone in the estate could feel it. The way Gabriel's eyes followed Tiffany across every room. The way she no longer flinched from his touch, but leaned into it like a flower seeking sunlight. Dante watched them with a mixture of amusement and concern that he wisely kept to himself. But something was breaking in Tiffany, fracturing along fault lines she couldn't repair. She found herself in the library again. Always the library, as if books could shield her from the truth clawing its way up her throat. She was curled in the leather chair by the window when Gabriel found her, barefoot in one of the shirts she'd stolen, her hair loose and tangled from sleep she couldn't find. "You're avoiding me," he said from the doorway. "I'm reading." "You're on the same page you were on 20 minutes ago." He crossed the room with that predatory grace that still made her pulse spike. "Talk to me, Tiffany." She closed the book. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." Gabriel pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms. "Whatever's been eating you alive since we came back. Whatever makes you look at me like you're waiting for the world to end." "Maybe I am," she whispered. Something fierce flashed in his eyes. "Then let it end." He walked her backward until her spine hit the wall, his body caging hers, his hands braced on either side of her head. But this wasn't the possessive dominance from before. This was desperation, restraint stretched to its breaking point. "Tell me to stop," he growled, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath ragged. "Tell me you don't want this, and I'll walk away. I'll give you your freedom. I'll let you go." Tiffany's hands fisted in his shirt. Every rational thought screamed at her to take the offer, to run, to protect them both from the devastation her secret would unleash. "I can't," she breathed. Gabriel's control shattered. He kissed her like a drowning man breaking the surface, consuming and violent and terrifyingly tender all at once. His hands were in her hair, tilting her head back, claiming her mouth with a hunger that made her knees buckle. She kissed him back with equal desperation, her nails digging into his shoulders, her body arching against his like she could somehow merge them into one being that didn't have to carry the weight of what she knew. His mouth moved to her jaw, her throat, the sensitive spot behind her ear that made her gasp. "Mine," he murmured against her skin. "Tell me you're mine." "I'm yours," she whispered, and it was the truest thing she'd ever said and the worst lie she'd ever told. Because how could she belong to him when she was built on a foundation of deception? Gabriel carried her to his room. Not hers is, and they fell into his bed in a tangle of limbs and desperate kisses. He worshipped her body like she was something sacred, his hands mapping every curve, his mouth learning every sound that made her come undone. And when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that broke her completely. Afterward, Gabriel fell asleep with his arm around her waist, his face buried in her hair, his breathing deep and even, peaceful in a way she'd never seen him. Tiffany lay awake in the darkness, tears sliding silently down her temples. Because she loved him, God help her. She loved Gabriel Silvabaros with a ferocity that terrified her. And the secret of that night 18 months ago, the truth about Marcus's death, about the gun, about who really pulled the trigger, stood between them like a wall made of lies. A wall that would either crush them both when it fell or bury her alive when Gabriel finally learned she'd been lying to him from the moment he'd touched her zipper. She couldn't love him and keep lying, but she couldn't tell him the truth without losing him forever. The choice was impossible. The wall was unbreachable, and time was running out. The attack came on a Tuesday, ordinary and brutal in its timing. Tiffany was in the garden when she heard the first gunshot, a sharp crack that sent birds scattering from the trees like dark confetti. Her body moved before her mind caught up, muscle memory from another life taking over as she sprinted toward the main house. More gunshots, shouting, the organized chaos of violence she recognized too well. She found Gabriel in the entrance hall, Dante and two guards forming a protective circle around him as masked men poured through the shattered front doors. Blood already stained the marble floor. One of the guards was down, clutching his shoulder. "Get her out of here," Gabriel barked at Dante, his gun already drawn. But Tiffany saw what they didn't, the reflection in the massive mirror behind them. A sixth man flanking left, weapon raised and aimed directly at Gabriel's unprotected back. She didn't think, couldn't think, just moved. Tiffany grabbed the heavy marble bust from the hall table and hurled it with precision that came from years of training she'd never told anyone about. It caught the flanking attacker in the temple with a sickening crack. He went down hard, his gun clattering across the floor. The distraction was enough. Gabriel spun, fired twice, and the remaining attackers retreated in a hail of covering fire. Dante was already on his radio calling for backup, for cleanup, for answers. and Gabriel was staring at Tiffany like he'd never seen her before. "Inside," he said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "Now." She followed him to his office, on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Her hands were shaking. Delayed shock, muscle memory, terror at what she'd just revealed. Gabriel closed the door behind them with ominous care, then leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Blood splattered across his white shirt. "That was a perfect throw," he said. "Distance, trajectory, force. You dropped a 200-pound man with a decorative sculpture." Tiffany wrapped her arms around herself. "I was lucky." "Luck doesn't account for that kind of accuracy." His dark eyes pinned her in place. "Who taught you to fight, Tiffany?" "No one. I just don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't lie to me. Not now. Not after everything." She could feel it all unraveling. 18 months of carefully constructed fiction coming apart like rotted thread. "Gabriel, you saw the flanking position before my trained men did. You assessed threat vectors, calculated trajectory, executed a disabling strike in under 3 seconds." He pushed off the desk, closing the distance between them. "Those are military skills, professional skills. So tell me, little dove, who the hell are you really?" "I'm exactly who I've always been." "Then why didn't Marcus's dutiful little sister mention she had combat training?" His hand caught her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "What else are you hiding?" "Everything." The truth tried to claw its way up her throat. That night, the gun, the choice she'd made that changed everything. "My father," she whispered, and it wasn't the lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. Before he left, he was paranoid. Taught Marcus and me self-defense, situational awareness. Said the world was dangerous and we needed to be able to protect ourselves. Gabriel studied her face like he was reading a book written in a language he'd almost forgotten. Suspicion warred with something that looked like hurt in his expression. "You saved my life," he said finally. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I love you. Because losing you would destroy me. Because I'm already drowning in you, and I don't know how to save myself." "Because you're mine too," she said instead. Gabriel's jaw clenched. He released her chin, but didn't step back. "The walls are closing in, Tiffany. Whatever you're hiding, whatever secret you're carrying, it's going to come out. And when it does, I need to know, will it destroy us?" She looked into his dark eyes and saw her own reflection. A woman built on lies, in love with a man who valued truth above almost everything. "I don't know," she whispered. And that at least was honest. Tiffany left at dawn, when the estate was quiet and the guards were changing shifts and Gabriel was still sleeping in his bed with her scent on his sheets. She took nothing but the clothes on her back and the weight of a truth that had been crushing her since the day he'd zipped her wedding dress. The envelope sat on his desk, cream-colored paper sealed with wax like a confession from another century. Her hands had shaken when she wrote it, tears blurring the ink in places. But every word was necessary. Every word was poison. She'd called a car using one of Dante's burner phones, walked out the front gate using the codes Gabriel had given her 2 weeks ago when he'd started trusting her with pieces of his world. The irony wasn't lost on her. He'd handed her the keys to her cage, and she was using them to break both their hearts. Her old apartment smelled like dust and abandonment, the furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts of the life she'd almost lived. Tiffany sank onto the couch and waited for the world to end. It took Gabriel 4 hours to find her. She heard his footsteps in the hallway before his fist pounded on the door, each blow echoing like a death knell. "Open the door, Tiffany." His voice was rough, dangerous, barely controlled. "Now." She opened it because she owed him that much, owed him the chance to look her in the eye when he destroyed her. Gabriel stood in the doorway, holding her letter. The envelope crumpled in his white-knuckled grip. His hair was disheveled, his shirt untucked, his eyes wild with something between fury and devastation. "You were there," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "That night, you watched your brother die." "Yes." "And you let me believe," he couldn't finish. His hand braced against the doorframe like he needed it to stay upright. "Richard killed Marcus. Your fiancé murdered your brother, and you were going to marry him anyway." "I didn't know it was him," Tiffany whispered. "Not until later." Not until I saw his face in a photograph with you. Until I realized you'd paid him to leave me. Gabriel, I didn't know. You knew enough. He stepped into the apartment, the door swinging shut behind him with ominous finality. You knew Marcus wasn't killed by my organization. You knew I'd been hunting the wrong ghost for 18 months, and you said nothing. I was afraid. Of me? The question was raw, wounded. Of losing you. The admission broke something in her chest. I fell in love with you, Gabriel, and I knew the moment you learned the truth about that night, about Richard, about what I witnessed. I knew you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me right now. Like she was a stranger, like she'd reached into his chest and ripped his heart out with her bare hands. Gabriel's laugh was bitter broken. Richard's been hunting us. The attack yesterday, that was him, wasn't it? He knows you saw him kill Marcus. He knows you're the only witness who can tie him to the murder. Yes, and you still said nothing. He crumpled the letter in his fist. You let me fall in love with a ghost. The words hung between them like shattered glass. I'm sorry, Tiffany whispered. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes holding a devastation that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Gabriel, please. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the doorknob. I would have protected you, he said quietly. From Richard, from the truth, from everything. All you had to do was trust me. I know. Goodbye, Tiffany. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of the world. And Tiffany Campagna stood alone in her apartment, finally free, finally honest, and completely destroyed by the cost of both. The truth may cost everything, but lies cost more. Tiffany ends the story free, honest, and completely destroyed. The implication is that while honesty came at tremendous cost, living the lie was slowly killing her anyway. Sometimes the most painful choices, still the right one, not because it leads to a happy ending, but because it allows you to live with yourself. This story doesn't offer easy answers or comfortable morality. Instead, it presents the messy reality that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a good outcome, that good people make terrible choices, and that love, even real, profound love, sometimes is enough to overcome fundamental betrayal. Hey, family. Before the story ends, I want you to do something real quick. If this story moved you or taught you something or entertained you, show some love with a like. Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me where you're watching from. Your comments fuel these stories. Thanks for watching. Until I see you again another time. Enjoy the rest of your day.